Okay, so I'm re-recording the steps to do our Blender to Godot asset pipeline. I accidentally recorded the wrong screen during the live stream, which is not that surprising because I haven't been teaching online for a while, and so I didn't have my setup exactly the same as I used to. Anyway, I'll just get started. So you're going to need Blender for this. You can download Blender here. I'll put a link in the video description. And we're going to use Blender to prep our assets and then move them into Godot. Blender is a 3D modeling program. Godot is a game engine. So you can do a little bit of modeling type stuff in Godot, but it's not really what it's used for. Blender is really used to actually build models and edit models and sculpt and do all sorts of crazy stuff. And then we want to export those into Blender. So one thing that you'll notice is I don't even actually have to really save my files in Blender because I'm just bringing models in, I'm editing them to make them into something I want to use in Godot, and then I'm exporting. I'm also going to go over a good pipeline for doing this very quickly so that we can quickly make edits in Blender and update our models in Godot. And you'll see that once you get those steps down, it's very easy to make those changes. And so the first thing I'm going to do actually is make sure that my Godot project is updated. So I'm going to open up GitHub Desktop, and I'm just going to click Fetch Origin here. Earlier, I actually did have a couple updates. So I needed to fetch the origin here. Right now I don't, but it's always good to just click on that, make sure you're up to date before you start to make changes. So that's my GitHub update, but I'm actually going to be working in Blender to start. So I'm going to go ahead and open up Blender. And so when you first open up Blender, you're going to see a little pop-up. I don't see it right now because I've already sort of set Blender up on this computer. But what the pop-up is going to ask you is to kind of set up some defaults. And I would recommend just leaving those defaults the way they are unless you've used Blender before, in which case you probably have some preferences already. So I'm just going to click on New File General here. And so this is the Blender interface. There's a lot of stuff going on here. So obviously we're not going to cover everything. And we're really actually not going to have to make that many kind of like changes to what's going on. The Blender interface is really nice because you can completely change and modify everything you want to. So there's these different windows here, and you can see if I hover over the edges of the windows, I can resize them very easily up and down. And I can also get rid of and add new windows. So if I pull this window, if I get this little target in the bottom corner and I pull this window down, it's going to fill up the window here. I can do that like this as well. And if I want a new window, I just get that same little target. It's kind of hard to get, but once you see it, you'll get used to it. And then I can create some new windows. So you can see the default is this kind of 3D viewer, but you can change that by clicking on this little icon here. There's a lot of different views to let you do different things, but we're going to leave the defaults. And so if you play around with that stuff and you want to go back to the beginning, you can go here and click the outliner. The outliner is sort of like the scene view in Godot where we have everything that we use in the scene. Or the other thing we had open is the properties. That's kind of like the inspector in Godot, so we can change specific properties. Um, but if you want to go back to the default, you can always go to File, New, and go to General, and we don't need to save this. There's a bunch of other windows here for things like modeling or rendering or compositing or all sorts of different stuff, but we're just going to stay with this first one, the layout. Okay, so now let's go into how we kind of move around in the 3D view. So you're definitely going to want a 3-button mouse with a scroll wheel. You can work in Blender. A lot of people use like a stylus or do other things, but you're really going to want to use a 3-button mouse if you're going to be doing a lot of stuff in Blender. So on that 3-button mouse, I'm using the scroll wheel to zoom in and zoom out. And that's going to zoom into whatever I have selected, which is going to be orange like that. And that's the kind of default cube. So if I hit double A to deselect and then click on the cube to select it, we can select different objects. So zooming in and out on the scroll wheel, and then if I click down on the scroll wheel, I can rotate up and down and all around. Um, and so that's pretty easy to do, but it's very scroll wheel dependent. If you don't have a scroll wheel, you can map that to a different thing, but it's easier to just have a 3-button mouse like we have in class. Then if I hold Shift and click the scroll wheel, that's how I can pan, which is moving up and down and all around. So those are kind of the basics of moving around in the view part. You can change all of these things. If you hit Command comma, you're going to open up the preferences. And if you go to this key map, you can see that you can actually change everything that you might want to do in here. So you can change the input, you can change navigation, but you can also change the key commands. So Blender uses a lot of key commands for all sorts of different stuff. And I'll go over a few of those because it really does make your workflow a lot faster. And you can see that I actually changed a key command here where it says restore, but we might look at that later. Anyway, so once we are kind of in here, let's talk about a few different things in the interface. Um, on the uh, on the right side, if I hit N, it brings up this transform menu. You can also see this in the properties. If we just go to the object thing, which is this orange box here, you can see the same thing right here. But for some reason, usually I bring this up right here. And so this is kind of like the inspector. I can change the location of an object that's selected on the X, Y, or Z axis. I can change the rotation on all those axes, and I can also change the scale. So I can just change these numbers. I'm just scrolling back and forth. I can also like type in numbers directly, and it'll do stuff. And then, like most programs, I can hit Command Z to undo all of this stuff. If I get something weird and I want to get rid of this, I can hit X and then say Enter, OK to delete. So X is delete. And then if I want to add in a new object, I can either go up to the Add menu here and go to Mesh, and I can add that default cube back in there. Or you can also hit Shift A, and that'll bring up the Add menu, and you can find stuff there. So we'll come back to our transform menu in a bit, but let's hit N to get rid of that now. You also have this little gizmo here, which you can use to rotate. If I click on that, just like in Godot, and then I can align the views. So if I want to see the top or the left or the right or whatever, if I hit Z, uh, it's going to align me with either the top or the bottom. So Z is kind of the up and down. If I hit X, it's going to align me with the right or the left side. And if I hit Y, it'll align me with either the front or the back. And you can see that over here, which view we're in. And then if you want to get out of that, just hit your scroll wheel button again and scroll around. Um, and so that's how we can kind of change the navigation. Over here, there's a toolbar, which you can hide with the T key and bring back. And then under here, you can see we have the default selection. So this is if I want to like select objects, I can draw a box over them and it'll select it for me. The 3D cursor is kind of sets the orientation. And sometimes if you click, it's going to move that. I just hit Shift C. Just ignore that. You probably do not need to worry about that. So I have everything selected. I'm going to double hit A and then select our box again. If I click on the move tool, I can move back and forth, just like I can in Godot. And if I hold control, it's going to snap to these grid points, which might be useful. If I hold shift, it's going to move slowly so I can get more fine movement. Then I have the rotate tool as usual, and then the scale tool, of course. But usually I stick with this view and I use the key command. So if I want to move something. So if I go to object and go to transform, you can see there's move, rotate, and scale. And so if you want to move something, you can just hit G. To rotate, you can hit R. To scale, you can hit S. So if I hit G and I move, I can move anywhere, but it's depending on the view where I am right now. So if I switch to this view and I move around, it's only moving on Z and Y. Z is the blue up and down, Y is the green left and right here. And so if I go back to X, it's going to be, still centered. But I can also hit G and then specify an axis. So if I hit G and X, it's only going to move on this axis. If I hit GY, it's only going to move on the green axis. GZ, only up and down. So that gives you a little bit more precision. Also, if I hit G and then Shift Z, now I can move on the X and Y axis, but the Z is going to stay in the same place. So that could be useful as well. You can do that with all of your properties. So if I hit R, X, rotates on X or Y or Z. If I hit S, X, we're going to scale X, Y, or Z. And then you can also hit specific numbers. So if I hit G, X, and 5, it's going to move 5 units. If I hit G, X, and -5, it's going to go back. And just hit Enter to save that. So there's a lot of different ways to kind of move around and make simple changes in Blender. Okay, I'm trying to remember what else I talked about. So let's reset everything. So I'm going to go over this again later, but once you make changes, you can see there's like changes here to the rotation and stuff like that. If we want to reset these, I can just hit 0 and reset everything, or I can just make a new cube, whatever. Okay, so let's turn this into something that I would actually want to put into Godot. So we wouldn't need to put just a cube into Godot. So this is going to be a little bit more advanced. I'm not expecting people to do a lot of modeling in Blender unless you already have a decent amount of 3D modeling experience. In the second part of this video, I'm going to cover finding a model online and prepping it in Blender and putting it into Godot. And that's really what I expect you guys to use this for more. But let's go over just making a little pool like we did in Godot, and then we can see a couple things that are kind of similar between Blender and Godot, and then we'll have something to move over to Godot. Oh, one other thing I forgot to mention, if I want to find something, on Windows, it's F3. On the Mac, I don't have an F3, so I remapped it. So if you're on a Mac, you might need to remap it. But there's a search menu, which I mapped to Option Space, and that brings this up, and you can find anything here. And that's what I actually use a lot. If I can't remember the key command for something, I'll type it in, and I'll see what it is, and then it'll also show me if there's a key command set up with that. And if there's not, I can set one as well. So that's really nice. So I'm going to hit Escape to get out of there. Oh, another thing I forgot to cover was the view, fly view, which I can't remember because I don't actually really use this a lot. But the fly view is shift backtick. So shift backtick is the key to the left of the 1 usually. So shift backtick puts me in fly view. So I can kind of move in and out like I'm in a first person game. I actually don't really use this very much, but for some people who are more comfortable here, you might want to use this. Anyway, to get out of that, just hit escape. Okay. So let's do a little change to this cube. So I'm going to scale it. I'm going to hit S, and I'm going to scale on X by 5. And hit Enter. Then I'm going to hit S and scale on Y by 5, and I'll hit Enter. And then I'm going to scale on Z by 2, hit Enter. So I'm going to make my little pool again. So now I'm going to add an object. So I'm going to hit Shift A to add an object. I'm going to choose a mesh, and I'm going to use an icosphere. This is like a little simplified sphere. And when you add an object, the little menu comes up here where you can actually change some of the details. So I can make this a little bit more complex if I want to, but you don't have to. You can just ignore this. Right now it's hard to see because it's inside of my box. So another thing that's useful is the X-ray view, which is right here. You can also hit Option Z to toggle that. So now I can see where that sphere is, and I can click on it. If I click on my box, it's going to do that first, but then if I click again, I'll get my sphere. Okay, so let's go into side view, and let's scale this on all axes. So just S, and then I'll do, whoops, if I hit 3 and 4, it does both. I don't really want that, so let's do 4. I'll hit Enter. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. Then I'm going to move. So I'm going to hit G and Z, and I'll just do 2. We need to do a little bit more. So I'm going to hit Enter, G, Z, 2. I want to move it a little bit farther down. So I'm just going to hit G and then just drag it on Z. And I'm going to hit Control and hit Enter. Or click there. Okay, so now I have this lined up the way I want it. I'm going to turn off the X-ray view. And so we don't have the CSG tools in Blender like we do in Godot. Instead, what we have is modifiers. So I'm going to go to this wrench, which is the modifiers, and I'm going to add a modifier. Go to generate. There's a lot of these. Obviously, I'm not going to go over all of them, but this is the same as the CSG one. It's called Boolean. And so if I do a Boolean, right now I have to select an object that I want to do a Boolean with. So I can choose it from here, or I can use the visual selector. I can use this eyedropper and click on it. And now what is a little tricky is that it's doing it, but we can't really see it. So I'm going to use the eyeball in the outliner up here to hide my icosphere. Now we can see what it's doing to our cube. And the cool thing about this is we can actually move the cube around. So if I hit G and Y, you can see I can actually see how it's going to change, and it's still applying that modification. So I can play around with that a little bit. Eventually, if you want this to go into Godot, you have to apply this. So you go back to your modifier and you're going to hit apply. And there we go. That looks better. And then you can just delete the icosphere. We don't need this anymore. Okay, so now we have something that's a little bit more interesting. We can move this over to Godot. So now let's talk about exporting. So normally the way to do this is you want to select the object you want to export so you can ignore the other objects, and then go to File and go to Export. And we're going to use a GLB. So I'm just going to go down. Oops, I clicked on the wrong one. I'm going to go to File, Export, GLB. And this is going to bring up a window to export. I use this a lot, so you can assign a quick command for this. So if I go to File, Export, and I right-click here, I can say, it says remove because I already added it, but if you hadn't done this, it would say add to quick favorites. You can click on that. And what that does is if I hit Q, now this is right there. And you're going to see in a minute when we make some changes that this is going to save us a ton of time. So I'm going to click on here. I'm going to find my project folder. So I'm going to go into my documents, go to MEA 300 and go to my models. You can see what I made earlier. If I want to replace this, I can just click on that pool.glb. And then a couple things I want to do over here. First, I want to remember the export settings. That way I don't have to click on stuff every time I export, which you're going to see I'm actually going to do a fair number of times. Then under include, I'm going to say selected objects. So this ignores anything that's not selected. That's going to give me an advantage again in terms of just doing this very quickly. So then there's a few other things here we can ignore. You could turn off animation because we don't have any animation, but it's not going to make any, it's not going to save anything anyway, so you can just ignore that. So then we're just going to click Export GLTF. So when we go to Godot, it's going to do some importing. It did it pretty quickly. But now under this models folder, now you can see here's my pool.glb. I'm just going to delete this pigeon that I added earlier. So here's my pool.glb. And so what I can do is just throw this into the scene. I can just drag it in here. It looks like it didn't overwrite it because that's the old one. So let's delete this. I must have put this in the wrong place. I'm going to delete this and try again. So let's go back to Blender. I'm going to hit Q and export. And I'm going to export GLTF. And let's see, is it there? Yeah, there it is. Okay. I don't know why it didn't work the first time, but there it is now. So now we have this GLTF. Now remember, this is just the visuals. This doesn't have a collider. In Blender, you're not really going to make colliders because you're just making visual things. So it doesn't have a collider, but it does, you can see it. And it's easy to create a collider inside of Godot. So that's what we'll do in a second. So there's our pool. We can see it, but if we run the game, if I run the game real quick, if I walk over here, I'm just going to fall right through it. Okay, so not every mesh needs a collider, but if this particular mesh does need a collider, here's what we do. We're going to click on the pool. And if you open this scene, it's going to tell you it doesn't want to do that. And you really don't want to edit these things. You just kind of want to let them be as they are. Godot is really not designed for editing models. But if we want to make a mesh based on this data, if I right click on this and go to editable children, we'll be able to see that cube data. And so that's a mesh and we can use our mesh tools. So if I go up here to mesh and click create tri-mesh static body, that makes a little mesh that is now a collider. And so now we will be able to walk into this little pool. Okay, so that's pretty cool. But there's a couple things I want to go over in terms of making this process a little easier. So let's say for some reason I want my pool to be really long. You're going to be tempted to go into Godot and go over here and go to transform and find the scale and play around with it. But you really, really don't want to do that. It's really, really bad for the performance and it's going to run into errors. It's going to give you all sorts of issues down the line, especially if you do it a lot. So what we really want to do is edit our original model and just re-export it. And that's part of why we go through all these steps to make sure that it's really fast to do that. So we're less resistant to that. So let me show you how fast this is. So if I go back to Blender, I've got my model. So we're going to go over how to do this, but we're also going to go over something that you may run into. So first thing I'm going to do is just do a change and export it. So I'm going to say, I'm going to scale, I'm going to say S on Y by 2 and enter. So now we've got a longer pool, and let's say that this is all we want to do. Now I'm going to export again. I'm going to hit Q and just hit enter, and that's it. That's the whole export process. So we've made a change, we've exported it. So it's actually really, really fast if you have everything set up the way we do here. So let's go back to Godot, and our pool is re-imported, but nothing's changed. So why is that? So this is the problem you're going to run into. So in Blender, notice that there's all these numbers for the scale. And what that means is basically Blender is like scaling this thing, but it hasn't actually changed the geometry. We have to say that this is like the actual scale for Blender to export our model looking the way it has it scaled. There's a really easy way to do that. You just go to Object and you go to Apply, and you can apply the location, rotation, and scale, or you can apply them all at the same time. Um, our location should be 0, 0, 0, so that's fine. Rotation is 0, 0, 0, that's fine. Our scale is not, it should be 1, 1, 1. So let's go to add, or let's go to object, let's go to apply, and let's go to scale. Now this is 1, 1, 1, and so watch what happens. I'm going to export again. I'm going to hit Q, I'm going to hit enter, and hit enter one more time. And there we go. We exported our larger pool. So rotation in Godot is fine. You're going to have to do that at some point. So let's rotate this guy over here. It's just scaling that you really, really don't want to do. Okay, so let's rotate this guy over here and do this. But it's also a lot bigger because when we exported it before, we had scaled it up, and Blender didn't export that scale, it just exported the original mesh. So let's scale it down a little bit. So I'm just going to hit S, and I'm going to hit 0.5 to scale by 50%. So you can see the scale is 0.5, 0.5, 0.5. And we need to apply this again. So you can also hit Control A and apply scale, and hit Q to export, and hit enter and enter again. Oh, I clicked on the wrong thing. Q, enter, enter. Okay, just make sure your mouse isn't in the wrong place. There we go. Now we export it again. Now it's closer to the right size. You can tweak this around. Eventually, you'll get it right, but let's just put it here for now. So one thing you're going to notice is look at our mesh that we made earlier. It hasn't changed. Okay, so when you create a static mesh, it's not connected to the original mesh. So it's not going to change. So we need to delete this static body that we created before and just regenerate it. And that's fine. That's one reason to kind of wait until you've got everything set up exactly how you want it before you generate your static mesh. But you can always regenerate it very quickly. Okay, so now we can kind of walk down into this pool, and now we're back up. Okay, so that's pretty good. And yeah, now that's pretty much everything I wanted to cover there. So as I mentioned, we're not going to do a lot of modeling in Blender. What we're going to do instead is prepare our models. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to find a model online, I'm going to import it, and then I'm going to prep it in Blender, and I'm going to export it for Godot. Okay. So I'm going to use the same model I did last time just to save time, but I'll put some links. We kind of talked about different modeling sites where you can find different files. And so I'm going to talk, I'll put some links in the YouTube description, and as well as what did I call the Open Lab. Anyway, let's go. I think I found this model on Sketchfab earlier, or it's called Animals. Let's see if I can find it. There we go. Okay. Licenses downloadable. There it is. Okay. This is what we used earlier. And this was a good example because there's a bunch of stuff in here, but let's imagine that we only want one of these things. We don't want all of this stuff. How do we prep it in Blender to work in Godot? Because if we just throw this into Godot and try to take stuff out, it's going to be a total nightmare. So let's download this model. All of these formats are fine, or if it only has a certain format, but I'm always going to default to GLB. It's just it's a newer format, it's more optimized, and it works better. It's more accepted in different places. But anyway, I'm always going to do GLB. This is just a binary file. I'm going to do texture size as 1K. I don't really need high res textures, but if you want, you can. So let's just download this. And so that's going to go to my downloads folder. Let's take a look at that. There it is. So this GLB. So we're going to have to import that into Blender. So let's go back to Blender. I'm going to delete this. Don't need this anymore. Let's delete everything in here. So I just hit A and then X. And so now I'm going to import. So I can go to File, Import, and then I have to know the file. So I'm going to go to GLB. If it's like an STL or whatever, OBJ, you can always change it into a GLB. It doesn't matter. If you can get it into Blender, you can get it out as a GLB. So let's import this. Here we go. We see all of our stuff. They're just gray right now. There's our pigeon. We're going to use the pigeon. I'm going to hit double A to deselect everything and N to get rid of that menu. So if we want to see what the materials look like, just click on this material preview. You don't really need to do that, but you might be confused why you don't see those materials. There they are. But let's focus on this pigeon. So if I click on the pigeon, I can see there's actually a few different parts. And that's a good thing to review it. Even the eyes are separate. So I want to make sure to get all this stuff in the pigeon, but I don't really want the text or anything else. So I'm going to get close enough to the pigeon that I can see everything. I'm going to hit B to get my box select. And I'm just going to drag across all of this and just make sure it's all selected. And what I'm going to do is actually export this and then re-import it. That's just the easiest way to get rid of all this extra stuff I don't want. So I'm going to hit Q to export. I'm going to call this pigeon.glb, and it's going to save all this stuff. So there's, I could delete everything or whatever, but this is really going to be the easiest thing to do. So exported the pigeon. I'm going to hit A to select everything in the scene, X to delete, Enter, and there we go. I'm going to go to File, Import GLB again. And I'm going to go to my project folder and go to pigeon. And there's our pigeon. So it's looking pretty good. There's a couple things that we need to do. So I'm going to open up this transform menu over here. So notice that the scale is 0.1. That is not what we want. So we need to fix the scale. And then it's not in the center of the scene. So when we import it into Godot, it's going to always be offset. And so that's going to make it hard to work with. So we're going to fix those two things. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to apply the current scale. So I'm going to hit Control A and apply scale. And then I'm actually going to scale it up because I think it's pretty small. We'll see what it looks like in Godot, but I can see that it's quite small. So I'm going to scale up by 4 and hit Enter. And notice it's scaled, it moved over. That's another reason why we don't want to keep it over here. So that orange dot is where the shape is actually centered. So we want to move it over there. We want to move the shape here, and then the orange dot, it doesn't really matter. So I'm going to align with the top view and zoom in a little bit, and I'm going to hit G and X to grab and move on X, and I'm going to hold Control to snap to the grid. I'm just going to try to line it up with that green Y. Oops. Let's go back to top view. Why won't it let me go to top view? There we go. Okay, so you notice the orange dot moved over here. It's very small, but that's the actual origin of our bird. Okay, so now I need to move it. I want to center it a little bit better. So I'm going to hit G, X again, and just center it right on that green line. Now I'm going to hit G and Y and Control move it back to here. And then I'm going to look at the feet and see if they're kind of in the center. I'm getting sort of weirdly out of view. I thought that F would focus, but it doesn't seem to do that anymore. So let's try selecting F. No. Okay, let's look at our key map. I'm going to type in focus. There's no focus. Maybe it's center. Center. Sort of weird. Okay, let's go to view. View. Align view. Align view to active. Align active camera to selected. view lock to active? No. Oh, maybe it's because it's still not. Okay, maybe it's because this is still not centered. Anyway, let's take a look at these feet. They look pretty good. Okay. So that looks pretty good for the position. Now let's apply the position. So I'm going to hit Control A, and it's actually called location here. So notice that the orange dot is now right there. And I'm all whacked out. Okay, let's go to view. Let's try that again. Align to active bottom. No, that is not. Okay, let's try. This happens sometimes. You just have to, let's align view to active. No, align view. Oh, I shouldn't have done view lock. That's the thing that I'm not doing well. Okay. Let's go to view and okay. I locked my view. So you don't want to do that. If you do that by mistake, go over to the toolbar here, go down to view. We don't want to lock our view. We just want to align the view. Okay, now we're back in business. I still can't focus for some reason. Maybe they got rid of that. Anyway, now if we go to item, uh, let's select everything and apply the location. So now the location is 0, 0, 0. The rotation, this is a different rotation style. Let's go back to Euler, and rotation is 0, 0, 0. Scale is 4, 4, 4, so we need to apply the scale. So I'm going to hit Control A, apply the scale. So scale is 1, 1, 1. Okay, now we've got everything set up the way we want it. We've got everything selected. We can now export our pigeon. So we're going to hit Q, export GLB. We're going to overwrite our pigeon. That didn't really work last time, but we'll see if it works this time. I'm going to export GLTF. And now I'm going to go to Godot. It's going to import. There's our pigeon. So let's try just throwing the pigeon in here. So I'm just going to drag this guy up here. And that actually works pretty well. Okay, so let's go in here. So he's kind of small. You might want him to be a little bigger. Let's scale him up a little bit. So let's scale by 3. Hit enter. And remember to apply scale. And then Q to export. Export GLTF. Enter. There. Now he's big. That looks good. And you can rotate, you can move them around, but just don't scale. Scaling is almost never a good idea. Okay, there's our pigeon. Looks good. You can see the Godot turns the texture for the pigeon into a separate image. That's just how Godot wants it to be. But we don't really care about that. It looks fine. Okay, so now let's say we want to make a collider for the pigeon. You could just add a random mesh or a random collision shape that matches the pigeon. But if you want to make something in Blender, I'm not going to go over the modeling part so much, but I will go over how you would do this in terms of exporting. So if we want to make something in Blender to use as a mesh to kind of create our collider, we can make another mesh and we can just set it, add it into our scene and use the editable children to make that a collider. So let's do that. That's the last little bit we're going to do. So we'll go back to Blender. Let's say we want a collider. So I'm going to hit Shift A to add an object. I'm going to use an icosphere just as an example. And let's align our side view. And so I'm going to hit G and just move this up here. And then I'm going to just make it kind of the same size as the pigeon so we can run into the pigeon, but you know, we don't necessarily need to have it be exactly the same. If if you want to spend some time doing some modeling and make it a better representation of the pigeon, that's fine. But we just want something to run into. So this is going to be pretty good. So let's go ahead, let's grab this icosphere. I'm going to drag it out here. I'm going to rename this collider so we'll be able to find it very easily. And then we're not going to be able to see it because it's inside the pigeon, but you might want to go to the material and turn that off or do something like that. Well, I guess it doesn't have, it's going to have a default material. Let's worry about that when we get to Godot. So now we have this collider mesh. So make sure to select everything again. So I'm going to hit B, drag over everything. Then I'm going to hit Q, export GLTF, and just replace that pigeon. Then when we go back to Godot, nothing's changed. We can't see anything. But if we go to the pigeon and we go to editable children, if we, I didn't want to move that. If we hide all of this stuff, there you can see our mesh. So if we take our collider, we go to our mesh tools, create a mesh body. Now we've got a mesh. I can drag this up here, hide the collider, but our mesh will still work. Okay. So now let's turn our pigeon back on. Why does it do that? Okay. I just want to turn these guys on. Okay. So now we'll be able to actually run into the pigeon. You don't necessarily need to do this, but if you want to be running into the pigeon, this is what you would do. So there's our pigeon. I can walk through the wing, obviously, because there's no collider there, but I can't pass through the pigeon body. So that way you can make your own special collider. Can I stand on the pigeon? Maybe I can get on his back. I don't know, it's a little too slippery. That way you can make your own collider, you can model it and make it exactly what you want, and then bring it into Godot and make or actually make your own mesh and then make a collider out of it. Okay, so I think I covered everything that I had previously covered, and I'll post this video, and then you guys will be able to review this. Let me know if you have any questions or if you want to go over anything, and yeah, that's it for now. Let's remember to go to GitHub and commit. So adds new models, commit to main, and push to origin. There we go.